It's just after midday on Friday, August 24, 2012. Frank O'Hara walks into Stepaside Garda Station. He goes straight to the desk. He tells the Garda on duty that his daughter is missing. He gives a description. Elaine O'Hara, 36 years old, 5'4", broad build, brown hair to her shoulders. Last seen 2 days earlier. He explains that no one has heard from her. There have been no calls, no messages, nothing. Frank tells them that in his family that doesn't happen. They would always hear from Elaine. He stops for a moment, because now, saying it out loud, he knows something is very, very wrong. When someone is killed in Ireland, the Gardai call in a specialist unit of forensic crime scene examiners from the Technical Bureau. This is Ireland's real-life version of CSI, but it's nothing like the movies or TV shows. For 25 years, I was one of the detectives on that team. My name is John Sweetman. My job as a Garda detective in the Technical Bureau was to read the evidence that could not speak for itself. I learned to see what others might miss. Fingerprints smudged on the handle of a door, weapons disguised in everyday objects, handwritten notes that revealed more than the writer ever intended. The smallest traces often unravelled the bigger story. And now, I'm here to tell you those stories. In this podcast from GoLoud, I take you inside some of Ireland's most haunting investigations. This is Lines of Enquiry, a GoLoud original podcast that follows the evidence step by step and tries to uncover the real story behind the headlines. In this episode, I'll look into one of the most shocking cases the nation has ever seen. This is Lines of Enquiry. Elaine O'Hara, Coercion and Control. On August 22nd, 2012, 2 days before Elaine was reported missing, Dublin was gearing up for the opening of the annual Tall Ships Festival. For 4 days each summer, Dublin's quays are turned into an outdoor festival site, welcoming 100 ships and over 1 million people. That summer had been a complete washout, and the wettest summer Ireland had seen since the 1860s, and the weather wasn't letting up for the festival either. Despite the hazy rain and heavy skies, Dublin was buzzing, people milled around in plastic ponchos, the weather not dampening the city's spirits. Around half an hour's drive southeast in Bellarmine Plaza, Stepaside, Elaine O'Hara was making her plans to head into the festival. A few weeks earlier, she'd signed up to volunteer at the festival along with her dad's partner, Sheila. They'd attended a training day together, and Elaine had been made a team leader, an achievement she was proud of. Elaine had a great work ethic. She worked part-time in a newsagent's in Blackrock Shopping Centre. Although it was not like Elaine to turn down paid shifts at the shop she worked at, she was really looking forward to the tall ships. As well as working part-time at Ken's newsagents, she also worked as a childcare assistant at St John's National School in Ballybrack and studied nights trying to finish her Montessori teaching course. She also volunteered for the Red Cross on Tuesdays. Elaine lived a full and busy life, but she'd had a challenging time in the summer of 2012. Keeping herself busy was not unusual for Elaine. It had long been a way of managing the mental health difficulties she had faced throughout her life. But in the months before the Tall Ships Festival, that balance began to slip. She admitted herself into St Edmundsbury Hospital in Lucan, a place she had come to rely on during difficult periods, returning there 14 times over the previous 12 years. This time, she remained there for 6 weeks, having come close to suicide. Elaine's struggles had not come out of nowhere. She was born on St Patrick's Day in 1976 to Eileen, a teacher, and Frank, a banker. Elaine grew up in Killiney, and was the eldest of 4 children with 2 younger brothers and a younger sister. Her early years were marred with bullying and struggles with dyslexia. In her mid-teens, a close friend was killed in a road accident. This had a devastating impact on Elaine. She became introverted and withdrawn, leading to her first attempt at suicide and her first admission into psychiatric care. After admitting at 12 that she had obsessive fantasies about being restrained, her doctor felt she had gradually emerging psychosis. Elaine would be treated for depression and borderline personality disorder. Life didn't get any easier for Elaine. Her beloved ma'am Eileen died in 2002 at just 52 years of age, followed by her doctor's death a few years later. With 2 of her biggest supporters gone, Elaine started to spiral. During a hospital stay in 2005, Elaine told staff, "I wasn't born for life. No one likes me. I'm a bad person." By this time, she was showing masochistic behaviours and continued to self-harm. These hospital notes painted a sad picture. She smoked 40 cigarettes a day. She lives a very lonely life with no friends and finds it difficult to trust people. Despite her struggles, Elaine was bright and possessed a great drive and ambition. She wanted to become a teacher, but the formal academic qualifications needed made it difficult. She went on to study childcare instead. Elaine worked hard to overcome her struggles, and in 2010 she bought her own apartment through the County Council's affordable housing scheme. This helped Elaine's independence grow. She was well liked at all her places of work, and she'd been at the shop in Blackrock for 10 years. Her boss acknowledged he had his difficulties with her, but they worked through them and she was highly valued there. If a full-timer was sick, Elaine would be the first person he'd call. She was trustworthy and dependable, a key holder for the shop. She had a strong community who cared about her, even if at times they didn't understand her. She and her father Frank were very close, and even with all her work and study, they still spoke a few times a day and would meet in person several times a week. So when Elaine checked herself into St. Edmundsbury on July 12, 2012, he was a bit surprised, but he knew she had her worries and was glad she was getting help. In the months leading up to this last stay, Elaine had got herself into some money trouble. She was 4 months in arrears on her mortgage, and her apartment had also flooded. Frank had loaned her €6,000, but she still owed a lot more. But when he questioned why she had admitted herself into psychiatric care again, it was still a shock to hear her words. "You do not know what I've done." She then told him about a noose on a bookcase in her apartment. During the 6 weeks in hospital, Elaine kept up her job at the newsagents on weekends and took day leave. She attended that training day for the tall ships, made plans for the volunteer days with Sheila, and arranged her next few shifts at the newsagents. The day before her discharge, her doctor noted that she was in cheerful form, spontaneous, smiling, alert, and seemed really happy. She was excited about working with the tall ships. Around midday on Wednesday, August 22nd, Elaine checked herself out of St. Edmundsbury's and went to the pharmacy to fill 11 prescriptions to get her through the next month. Medication for diabetes, cholesterol and asthma, stomach and bowel problems, insomnia, anxiety and depression. As was often the case, she didn't have the money on her, but she promised the chemist that she would be back as soon as her next payday came in. She then went to Killiney to visit her father Frank, who was looking after her little niece. They all went together to the Shanganagh Cemetery. On the way, Elaine called the newsagents to check on her shifts after the festival and was busily texting on her phone. Frank wanted to make the most of their day together, and at one point he told her to put the phone away for a while. Around 3 p.m, they all went back to Frank's and had ice cream, and Elaine took her niece for a walk. At 4 p.m, Elaine left the house and, according to Frank, was in good form. She was going to get a decent night's sleep, as Sheila was meeting her early the following morning to start at the festival. That evening, Sheila, who could see Elaine's apartment from her own place, noticed that the lights weren't on. She assumed Elaine had gone to bed early and sent her a message. "See you at 7:15 a.m. Elaine's sister Anne also texted her that evening to say she was glad to hear she was out of hospital. Neither Sheila or Anne got any reply. At the time, that in itself didn't seem unusual. The following morning, Thursday, 23rd of August 2012, Elaine didn't arrive to meet Sheila. Sheila tried calling her, letting the phone ring out, expecting a call back, but there was nothing. After a short while, she drove over to Elaine's apartment and tried the buzzer, waiting longer than usual before pressing it again. There was still no response. By 8:30 a.m, she had called Frank. He had a key to Elaine's apartment that she had given to him for emergencies. When he let himself in, the apartment was quiet. At first glance, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. But as he moved through the space, he noticed something was not quite right. Elaine's iPhone was on the counter, plugged in and fully charged, and her handbag was nearby, with her keys, wallet and medication inside. They were things Elaine wouldn't leave home without. At first, he tried to explain it away. She might have stepped out briefly, gone somewhere nearby, or left in a hurry. But as the morning went on, and there was still no word from her, that explanation became harder to hold on to. By late that night, when he still hadn't heard from her, Frank sent her a message, half in frustration, half in hope. It's one we've all probably sent before when you go a few hours without hearing from a loved one. "Are you alive?" There was no reply. The following day, Friday, 24th of August, there was still no sign of Elaine. Sheila went back to the apartment and noticed that Elaine's car was not in the building's car park. Frank returned again, but nothing had changed. Her phone was still there, plugged in. Her handbag still where it had been. Everything exactly as it had been the day before. He knew Elaine never left without her phone, and that she would not normally leave the house without her keys, purse or medication. Now the concern had shifted. Frank began calling everyone he could think of. Family, work, the festival organisers. No one had seen or heard from her. He called the hospital. She had not checked back in there either. By that point, 2 days had passed. Frank and Elaine's younger sister, Anne, went to Step-Aside Garda station to report her missing. Frank told Gardai that in the O'Hara family, 2 days without contact simply didn't happen. Anne had asked her husband to drive over to the Shangana Park area to check for Elaine's light blue Fiat Punto near the cemetery, thinking maybe she'd gone back there. Frank called Elaine's brother, John, at work and asked him to go too. When the men arrived at Shangana Park, they found her car parked along the avenue leading up to the cemetery car park. The doors were locked. They called the AA to gain access to the car. Inside, they found her driver's license and leap card, cigarettes and a lighter, shopping bags and receipts. There was a sat-nav, and in the glove box, they found a Nokia phone charger. This struck them as odd. Elaine had an iPhone. Frank, Anne and Sheila joined them and they broke up to start searching the 110 acres that make up the parkland and cemetery. Their first thought was that she had possibly returned alone to her mother's grave and had been grabbed by someone. The cemetery is enormous, the final resting place of over 16,000 people. The fact it is accessible by car and you can drive through the whole place made them uneasy at the thought that she'd come to harm at the hands of someone. But there was another thing, something else weighing heavily on everyone's minds, initially unspoken. The whole family knew Elaine had been struggling and recently suicidal. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but it wasn't said aloud. They were worried. Elaine might have taken her own life. They searched everywhere, from the dog park, through the football pitches, and over the railway bridge that leads further east to the beach. There was no trace of Elaine. As the weather began to turn and rain rolled in, the O'Haras were joined by friends and Gardai as well as members of the civil defence. A Garda helicopter went up to search the cliffs and sea with heat-seeking cameras, but it wasn't long before the weather forced it to return. As the light faded, hopes of finding Elaine that night started to fade with it. Gardai examined Elaine's car and found that it had already been flagged the previous day after being seen parked in an unusual location on 2 separate occasions. A check confirmed it was registered to Elaine O'Hara, but as she had not yet been reported missing, it did not raise any immediate concern. When the sun set over Shangana Park, the family and the Gardai went to Elaine's apartment to see if they could find any more information. Elaine's brother, John, found a HP laptop that was different to Elaine's usual computer. He opened it and found it was password protected, so he suggested he would take it home with him and try to unlock it. John also found 2 printed pictures of hunting knives from the Active Hunting Ireland's website and a printout of a map to the Puck's Castle golf course in Rathmichael. The printouts were dated July the 11th, 2012, just a day before Elaine checked herself into Edmondsbury Hospital. John took notice of the date too, because a few weeks earlier he'd asked Elaine for a lift to that very golf course, and she had told him she didn't know where it was. Elaine also had a notebook where she'd written down the website, fetlife.com. Her brother pulled out his phone and looked up the site, then showed it to his sister Anne and the Garda in the apartment. It was a fetish site, a place built around bondage and control. In a locker by the bedside, Gardai found 2 heavy metal chains. In the living room, they found a black PVC bodysuit and rope. These weren't things her family recognised. This wasn't a side of Elaine they knew existed. The family didn't believe Elaine had a boyfriend, but Frank remembered that around 4 years earlier, she had told him she was seeing a man, an architect, he thought she said, and he was shocked when she told him he was married and that he tied her up and performed sordid acts. She soon told him it was over and she never mentioned him again. Gardai stripped Elaine's bed and found what looked like bloodstains on the mattress, but with the sheets over the top being clean, these stains appeared to be old. John went home and got into Elaine's HP laptop, logging into fetlife.com, and finding what he believed was Elaine's profile, under the name Chained Brunette. Several further searches of Elaine's apartment would occur over the following days, involving other members of the Gardai, and all devices and digital evidence was handed over to the Computer Crime Investigations Unit at Harcourt Square. At Stepaside Garda Station, other items from her apartment were sent, including a gas mask and printed material relating to BDSM and the Gorean lifestyle. They also had the notebooks and Elaine's passport, bank documents, a savings book, and the spare keys to the Fiat. The Computer Crime Investigations Unit were able to retrieve messages from Elaine's phone and laptop. There were several conversations about sex fetishes and conversations with a person named David, but there was nothing untoward or particularly worrying in anything to or from Elaine that they could see. And there was absolutely no correspondence with anyone about meeting up on the day she went missing. By Tuesday, Gardai issued their first missing persons statement about Elaine. A man saw this and came forward. He believed he had seen her. On the evening she disappeared, around 2 hours after Elaine had left her dad's house, The man had been out running in Shangana Park, alongside the cemetery, when a woman he believed to be Elaine stopped him and asked for directions to the pedestrian railway bridge that leads towards the beach. He pointed the way, later recalling that she didn't engage in conversation. She seemed in a hurry and moved on quickly after they spoke. A short time later, as he made his way back, the man saw Elaine again, this time on the footbridge itself, heading in that same direction. Using an app on his phone, Map My Run, which had recorded his exercise, he was able to place the time between 5:45 p.m. and 6:15 p.m. It was a precise window, a clear sighting, and the last time anyone can place Elaine O'Hara with certainty, moving through the park and towards the coast that evening. And then she disappears. No sightings, no contact, no explanation. Just one question that investigators would spend the next 12 months trying to answer. What happened to Elaine O'Hara after she crossed that bridge? In the days after Elaine O'Hara disappeared, the search continued. Her family returned again and again to Shangana Park and the surrounding coastline, walking the same ground, checking the same places, hoping they had missed something. At first, there was an expectation that she would be found quickly. The last confirmed sighting placed her heading towards the beach. But nothing was found. Days passed, then weeks. Searches extended along the east coast, from Blackrock to Bray, across beaches, cliffs and coastal paths. Gardai, volunteers and members of the civil defence combed the area, but there was no sign of Elaine. No belongings, no trace, and as time went on, the possibility of suicide, unspoken at the beginning, became harder to ignore. As the first-year anniversary approached, Frank let the apartment in Bellarmine Plaza out. Elaine's family went to Shangana Beach and placed flowers in the sea on the date she had disappeared a year earlier. It was something they felt they had to do. 3 weeks later, on the evening of September the 10th, 2013, 3 local fishermen ran into each other on a bridge over Vartree Reservoir. They stood there commenting on how low the water was, because that year there had been a heat wave that had caused the water levels to dramatically drop. In 2012, because of all the bad weather, the water under that bridge had been as high as 20 feet, but on this day, it was only 12 to 18 inches. From the bridge they noticed the sun catching shiny objects under the water. One of the men got a ratchet strap and a hook, and they fished out a bag of items and some rope. Inside the bag they made an odd discovery. There were handcuffs, a ball gag, a blindfold, and rusty chains with cuffs on each end. There were also long straps with padded restraints and buckles, a blue hoodie and a white vest. They decided to leave the items on the bridge wall, but the discovery didn't sit well with one of the anglers. He came back the next morning, gathered up the items, and took them all to Roundwood Garda Station. The angler handed the items to Garda James O'Donoghue. His first reaction was that, although pretty odd, someone had just dumped belongings they didn't want anymore. Still, he bagged each item and hung the clothes to dry. 3 days later, on September the 13th, 2013, and just over half an hour north of Vartree Reservoir, a dog walker was out strolling on Killikee Mountain near Rathfarnham. She was taking the dogs along some private land she often walked, on the foothills of the Dublin mountains. As she approached her car, she noticed her own dog had run off from the group to an isolated section of the woodland. She could hear the dog scratching, but when she called, he didn't come. She put the other dogs in the car and waded into the thick undergrowth. As she pushed through, she saw some bones and old clothing with something inside. Using her foot, she thought she felt a shoe. There was a collar and a rusty knife. Then she saw her dog with another 2 bones. She called the landowner and they went back together, finding what they thought might have been a jawbone. They called Tala Garda Station, who sent 2 officers down to the scene. After finding what they agreed was a jawbone and a rib cage, as well as a tracksuit bottoms and a runner, they cordoned off the area and alerted the Technical Bureau. Garda Sergeant Ronan Lawler would run the search team. He arrived alongside other members of Rathfarnham Gardaí. They examined the rusty knife and what appeared to be a garden spade. There was no identification with the remains. Early the next morning, the bones were confirmed to be human. Deputy State Pathologist Dr. Michael Curtis and anthropologist Dr. Lorraine Buckley examined the scene. Buckley noted that although the bones weren't buried, the dense trees and thick grass easily hid the remains in the undergrowth. The soft terrain had caused them to sink into the ground as the body decomposed. Without an identification or cause of death, the remains were moved to Dublin City Morgue for a post-mortem. As word got out that unidentified remains had been found, Gardaí locally and nationwide started to go back through their records for missing people. Unsolved case files were pulled out as the network of Garda divisions waited for a possible identification. The press too would spring into life, their thoughts drifting to the unsolved cases of the 1990s, linked to Operation Trace, a Garda inquiry set up to examine whether a number of missing women cases were connected, cases that would later become known as the Vanishing Triangle. Over at Roundwood Garda Station, Garda James O'Donoghue couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The items that were sitting in his evidence locker were disturbing him. He decided to head down to Vertree Reservoir. He climbed down onto the exposed bed and waded out through the thick silt and mud, testing each step as he moved further in. He searched the area carefully, but he found nothing. The following morning, Dr. Michael Curtis' post-mortem was underway. He noted that 65% of the person's remains had been found, the remaining bones likely taken by animals. Moss growth indicated that the remains had been exposed to sunlight and water after sinking into the soft, wet ground of the dense undergrowth. The bones present showed no trauma, and although there was no soft tissue or organs left, marrow still existed within the bones. It was a clear indication that the remains had been there no more than 2 years. No cause of death could be determined. Dr. Curtis was not able to identify who the person was, but he could say with some certainty that the remains were those of a female, of large build, who may have been in her 30s. Dr. Curtis thought there was a chance they could get an ID from the jawbone. It was sent to Dublin Dental University Hospital to be examined. There was one family in particular that Gardaí contacted in preparation for the possibility it was their loved one: the O'Haras. There was no denying that the clothing had been a clear match to the type they believed Elaine was wearing when she disappeared. The following morning, Monday, September 16th, 2013, was calm. Clear skies, bright and sunny with no wind. The conditions brought Garda James O'Donoghue back to the Vertree Reservoir. The items recovered previously had stayed with him. He needed to look again. From the bank, he could see it. Something beneath the surface. Shiny. Out of place. He climbed down the embankment and stepped into the water. But as he moved forward, the silt lifted from the bottom, clouding everything. He stopped. Then slowly he began to search by hand, feeling his way across the bed of the reservoir. His hand touched something. Metal. It was a set of handcuffs. He reached again. This time, fabric. He pulled it free. A red school bag. Inside the bag there was a knife. a bondage mask, and an asthma inhaler. Garda O'Donoghue kept going. A short distance away, his hand closed around something else. Keys, 9 of them on a ring, held together with 3 supermarket loyalty cards. One stood out. Dunn's Stores. He called their head office and gave them the number on the card and waited. The response came back with a name. Elaine O'Hara, Bellarmine Plaza, Stepaside. O'Donoghue entered the details into the pulse system, where he learned that Elaine had been missing for over a year. He sealed off the bridge and contacted his superiors. Vartry Reservoir was now a crime scene. The Garda water unit and officers from Bray Garda Station arrived at the reservoir and began a detailed search of the area, working through the silt and mud, carrying out fingertip searches underwater, and scanning the bed with metal detectors. More items were recovered. Additional restraints, more implements. This time they also pulled up a Nokia mobile phone, with its SIM card still intact. Across the city, at the Dublin Dental University Hospital, Mary Clark's examination of the jawbone brought another breakthrough. After cross-referencing the remains with Elaine's dental records and DNA, she was able to confirm the identity. The remains were Elaine O'Hara. An initial announcement suggested that her death may have been the result of a personal tragedy, rather than a homicide. But as Gardai began to build a clearer picture, that position would not hold for long. Elaine had attended hospital 47 times in the 6 years before she disappeared, a detail noted as her medical records were reviewed. Gardai informed the O'Hara family that the remains were hers, and that the discovery at the Vartry Reservoir and the investigation into the unidentified body had now become one case. Garda James Codd from Stepaside was tasked with collecting and cataloguing the items recovered from the reservoir. Among them, the red school bag containing a large camera lens and the barrel of a gun. More knives were also found. The keys recovered from the water began to unlock the final pieces of Elaine's life. One started her Fiat Punto. 3 opened the doors to her apartment. 2 belonged to her father, Frank's home. Another opened the classroom in the Montessori where she worked. What had initially appeared to be a chance discovery was now something far more significant. The drop in water levels at the reservoir, from around 20 feet the previous year to just inches in places, had exposed a location that otherwise may never have been searched. Without that good fortune, there would have been no reason to look there, more than 50 kilometres from where Elaine had last been seen. As the 2 strands of the investigation formally merged, an incident room was established in Blackrock Garda Station. What had begun as a missing persons case was now something else entirely. This was a murder inquiry. From then on, the investigation into Elaine O'Hara's murder would be led by Chief Superintendent Dermot O'Sullivan, Superintendent John Hand, and Detective Superintendent Kevin Dolan, all experienced officers based in the DMR South Garda Division. Detective Sergeant Peter Woods from Blackrock Garda Station was the officer charged with the day-to-day running of the investigation. Soon, the Underwater Unit, the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and the Technical Bureau would be needed. Gardai returned to Elaine's apartment and took the mattress that they had originally seen bloodstains on as evidence. They found that alongside the bloodstains, there were several puncture holes in the mattress. Testing began in search of a DNA profile. Garda Codd went to a second scene where new evidence had been found on the mountain. Amongst other possible innocuous items, he bagged 2 hacksaw blades, insulation tape, cable ties, and wire. On the evening of September the 18th, while they gathered CCTV footage, Gardai made a fresh appeal to the public for information. They pleaded for anyone who met, spoke to, or engaged with Elaine between August the 22nd and August the 24th, 2012, or who saw her Fiat Punto, to contact their incident room at Blackrock Garda Station. A woman immediately came forward. On the evening Elaine disappeared, between 5 p.m. and 5:30 p.m, and shortly before the sighting from the jogger, the witness saw a woman crying very loudly in the Shanganagh cemetery. She was facing down toward the grass by a grave. The upset woman fit Elaine's description and was wearing what could have been tracksuit bottoms. By this time, CCTV was being examined from the day Elaine disappeared. One of the first videos recovered was Elaine's car leaving her apartment's car park at 5:05 p.m. the day she disappeared. In the footage, she's walking towards her car looking distressed. This and the new witness sightings solidified the timeline. Elaine had left her father Frank's house around 4 p.m. She'd gone home, put her phone on charge, and dropped off her bag. Sometime in the next 40 or so minutes, she left her things behind and returned to the cemetery, fitting in with both sightings. There was one strange new piece of evidence on the CCTV from her apartment complex. As Elaine walks to her car, she is seen clearly holding a mobile phone. On closer look, it was a different phone to the iPhone she'd left in her apartment. It left Gardai with no doubt. Elaine had a secret phone no one knew about. Investigators knew this could be a key piece of information, and they requested the Garda Computer Crime Unit to download any retrievable data from all phones and laptops seized, including the Nokia phone found in the reservoir. It had been lying underwater in the silt and mud for over a year, and most likely wasn't going to give up any secrets. But it was worth a go. As specialist Gardai worked on the devices, the press reported on theories the Gardai and investigators were working on. Senior officers stated they had not discounted the possibility that the person who killed Elaine may have attacked or even killed before. They theorised that she was most likely dead within hours of last being seen alive on the footbridge, and that she didn't dump her own belongings in the reservoir, and that she may have been dumped rather than killed at the site where she was found. As far as any suspects, their main focus was on Elaine's online dating background, and they believed there was a chance Elaine had arranged to meet someone, or worse still, been abducted by someone she had been in contact with. They believed she could have been lured to the cemetery. Garda Commissioner Martin Callanan made a statement warning women who use internet dating services to do so with extreme caution. The Commissioner also addressed something that was on the minds of the entire nation: Operation Trace. He acknowledged the parallels in Elaine's case to the string of unsolved murders in the 1990s, of the women who disappeared from various locations in Leinster. But he wanted to assure people that Garda members from both Operation Trace itself and the Cold Case Unit were also working on the O'Hara case. They would take into consideration any fresh evidence here that may be relevant for the families of those cold cases. Although they were looking into any links, he said it was far too early for him to speculate how Elaine had died. While awaiting any possible data from the Nokia phone, Elaine's iPhone and laptop, originally retrieved from her apartment, were carefully examined. Investigators revisited the websites they knew Elaine had been on. They trawled her profiles and the messages for anyone she may have been arranging to meet. At least 8 men whose details were found in Elaine's devices were contacted. Some she had even met in person, including one man she met for coffee at the shopping centre. But none of the men could be linked in any way to her murder. By the following day, 7 days on from the discovery of Elaine's remains and 3 days into the murder inquiry, detectives had taken over 120 witness statements from the public and seized in excess of 1,600 hours of CCTV footage. Some of the press coverage had been unforgiving. Details of Elaine's private life and vulnerabilities were laid out across front pages, reduced to headlines and speculation. As the reports, rumours and commentary spread, her family chose to respond publicly. In a statement issued through the press, they said, "The O'Hara family are distraught at the death of their popular and much-loved daughter and sister, Elaine. We understand the role of the media in providing accurate and helpful information, as well as facilitating Garda communication with the public. But we ask that you respect our need for privacy and space to grieve at this very difficult time." Frank O'Hara also provided a formal statement to Gardai. The developments in the case had prompted him to revisit a conversation he had had with Elaine 5 years earlier, when she had told him she'd been seeing a married man. He explained that during arguments, Elaine could be provocative. She would sometimes say things designed to shock. It was something the family had learned to take with a pinch of salt. But on that occasion, she had told him the man liked to tie her up and carry out what she described as sordid acts. At the time he had dismissed it, Elaine looking for a rise. Now it felt different. As the investigation widened, more people began to come forward, recalling conversations that had not seemed significant at the time. A woman Elaine had befriended at the hospital in 2007 said she had last seen her around a year before she disappeared. On that occasion, Elaine had shown her fresh cuts across her stomach, several inches long, and told her she was in a relationship with a man she had met online. He was an architect. He liked to cut her, and she told her friend that she enjoyed being cut. But she also admitted she was wary of him. The friend warned her she was playing a dangerous game and advised her to write down his name and address in case anything happened. She later said she felt Elaine was looking for love and needed attention. A nurse from the hospital also came forward. She had spoken to Elaine for around 45 minutes on the night before her discharge and her disappearance. Elaine had been quiet. When asked what was wrong, she said she was pissed off. The nurse encouraged her to talk. Without naming him, Elaine described the man she had met. He was married, had children, and was also an architect. She said they were involved in bondage, that he had a key to her apartment, and he was coming and going frequently. At times during the conversation, she appeared upset. At others, she laughed. The nurse asked her directly, if he was causing her concern, why not go to Gardai? Elaine said she didn't want to because of his children. As Gardai began to piece these accounts together, a picture started to form. They had to consider whether this was a consensual relationship that had escalated or something far more serious. Then, a new development. At the Blackrock Incident Room, Detective Chief Superintendent Dermot O'Sullivan received confidential information. A man believed to be working on Baggot Street in Dublin. Look into him. The information was considered significant enough that O'Sullivan chose to keep it tightly contained, both to protect the source and to avoid steering the investigation too early in one direction. Detective Sergeant Woods and his team would continue their work, oblivious to this tip-off. But now, for the first time, Gardai had something they had not had before. A name. Dwyer. Baggot Street is a busy commercial street on the south side of Dublin city centre, running from near St Stephen's Green towards the Grand Canal. It is lined with office buildings, government departments, law firms and financial services. A white-collar area, it is effectively one of the main business hubs in the city. If the information was right, the man they were looking for worked here. The digital investigation had started to yield results. The Garda Computer Crime Unit confirmed that Elaine's iPhone had been backed up to her laptop. That allowed investigators to reconstruct her contacts and messages across both devices, including files she had deleted. Within those files, certain terms appeared again and again: master and slave. Thousands of text messages were recovered between Elaine and a contact saved as David. Gardai had already seen that name on her phone, a contact whose messages had stopped abruptly in 2011. Digging further into Elaine's laptop, Detective Garda Breed Wallace uncovered a calendar entry dated June the 30th, 2011. The text on the entry was Graham's phone number. The same number was saved on her iPhone under a different name, David. Tracing that number led investigators to a prepaid mobile phone purchased at the 3 Mobile Phone Shop on Grafton Street, registered under the name Goroon Case Home, a name that did not exist. The messages linked to that number painted a mixed picture. Some were mundane, chit-chat, references to work, to being pissed off about a pay cut, to have come 5th in flying, the birth of a child. Others were anything but ordinary. The content was shocking. The casualness of how it was broached also disturbing. One message read, "Looking forward to getting new bike tomorrow, to try and lose weight. Must get fit for the murder." Meanwhile, CCTV from Elaine's apartment complex was being reviewed in detail. A man appeared in multiple clips. This man came and went, and he had a key. On August the 13th, 2012, while Elaine was still in hospital, he was seen arriving carrying a red school bag. 2 days later, he left with it. He was never seen returning it. It looked to be the same red school bag that was recovered from the reservoir. Between January and August 2012, the man was seen on CCTV visiting the apartment at least 9 times. In one clip, he and Elaine entered the building together and took the lift. In another, dated July the 11th, the day before Elaine admitted herself to hospital, he appeared to switch between 2 mobile phones. That same day, Elaine was seen retrieving a separate phone from her letterbox. It was clear now that there was more than one device in use. Having removed the mattress from the apartment, the test results came back. Forensic testing revealed 2 DNA profiles on the mattress: Elaine's DNA and a second person's, located in multiple areas. It was identified as both semen and blood. That same profile appeared on items recovered from the reservoir. Besides Elaine and this unidentified DNA profile, no others were found. Whoever this person was, they were not peripheral. They were central. By now, Superintendent O'Sullivan had 2 names: Dwyer from his tip-off and Graham from Elaine's laptop. At the same time, Detective Sergeant Peter Woods and his team, still unaware of O'Sullivan's lead, were pursuing their own line of inquiry. They had focused on a text message which the man sent to Elaine to say he has been 5th in flying. Initially, they believed it referred to aviation. Searches of pilot registers returned nothing of value. Then one of the team suggested model aeroplanes. Records were trawled, and they came across a match. Buried in the Model Aeronautic Council of Ireland's result pages were the final standings of the East Coast Scale Championships, held on the same date as the message was sent to Elaine that said 5th in flying. There were 6 competitors in the race. The person who finished in 5th place, Graham Dwyer. Gardai had a name. They entered it into the Pulse computer system and discovered an address: 6 Kerrymount Close, Fox Rock. They found that Graham Dwyer had reported that his bike was stolen from his office. He said he worked at A&D Whiteshirt Architects on Bagot Street. Gardai cross-checked the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland register which confirmed their tip-off. Graham Dwyer was an architect. Then a social media dive threw a curveball few of the investigating Gardai expected. The texts, twisted in nature, a perversion for inflicting pain, had come from Graham Dwyer, a married architect with children, who had recently announced his wife had given birth to a baby. In the early hours of September 27, 2013, O'Sullivan and Sergeant Tom Doran positioned themselves outside his house in Kerryman Close in Foxrock. They were there for one reason. It was bin night. They were looking for DNA. They had a profile from Elaine's mattress and the items recovered from the Vartree reservoir, but without a profile to match the DNA to, it was worthless. Once the wheelie bins were placed on the public footpath, they could be searched without a warrant. If they were lucky, something in the rubbish might give them that match. O'Sullivan approached and retrieved several items from Graham Dwyer's wheelie bin, which were immediately sent to the forensic science laboratory. Work continued on the phones recovered from the reservoir. The Nokia handset, once dried and examined, revealed a final detail. It contained just one saved contact. SLV. Slave. This was the killer's phone. Gardai now had two linked devices, the master's phone and the slave's phone. Using network records, cell tower data, and phone credit top-up histories, crime analyst Sarah Sked began mapping the movements of those phones. Thousands of data points showed a consistent pattern. Weekdays, the phone was active in central Dublin. Evenings, it returned to South County Dublin. Analysis showed the prepaid Garoon phone, bought on Grafton Street at the Tree Shop, moved step for step with Dwyer's work phone. Wherever one went, the other followed. A workplace in the city, a home in the suburbs, the phones pinged the same towers. They belonged to the same person. Then came a more specific movement. On July 4, 2012, the phones travelled from Dublin to Galway and back. Sked cross-referenced the timing with toll booth data along the route. A vehicle was identified passing through, a blue Audi TT. The investigators traced the registration. The car was registered to Graham Dwyer. Days later, the DNA results from the items recovered from the bin were returned. They had a match. The DNA from the mattress at Elaine's apartment was the same DNA from the items recovered from the reservoir. They also matched items taken from Graham Dwyer's bins. At that point, the strands of the investigation converged. The messages, the phones, the movements, the model airplanes, the CCTV, the DNA, all pointed in the same direction. All pointed to one man. Graham Dwyer. By this point, the investigation had changed completely. Elaine O'Hara had vanished in August 2012 after leaving her father's house, returning briefly to her apartment and then making her way back towards Shangana Cemetery and the beach. For more than a year, her disappearance had remained unsolved. Then in September 2013, two discoveries changed everything. Human remains were found in the Dublin mountains by a dog walker, and at Vartree Reservoir, more than 50 kilometres from where Elaine had last been seen, Gardai recovered a red school bag, keys, restraints, weapons, and a Nokia phone from the silt and mud. The remains were confirmed as Elaine's, and the keys belonged to her. The bag and the phone pointed to a hidden life that investigators were only beginning to untangle. Gardai had followed the evidence through witness statements, CCTV, digital records, phone data, and DNA. All of it led to one man, Graham Dwyer. But identifying Graham Dwyer was only one part of the investigation. Now Gardai had to understand what had happened between him and Elaine O'Hara, and how a relationship that began online had ended with Elaine's skeletal remains found in the Dublin mountains and her belongings at the bottom of Vartree Reservoir. As the Garda Computer Crime Unit continued working through Elaine's devices, the scale of the contact between Elaine and Dwyer was uncovered. Dwyer's email addresses and online identities were found entangled in the same world Elaine had been exploring. On FetLife, where Elaine's profile was found, he went under the accounts Architect77 and Fetish Boy. Investigators traced the beginnings of their relationship back to online contact, before it moved to text messages in 2008. Over a 22-month period, Dwyer sent Elaine 847 text messages from his work phone to her iPhone. The full content of those early messages could not be confirmed, but Gardai believed they showed the beginning of a relationship that was secret, intense, and increasingly controlling. Then contact appeared to stop. For over a year, there was nothing between the two. Gardai did not know why. But in March 2011, Dwyer walked into the Three Shop on Grafton Street and bought a prepaid phone and registered it under the false name Garoon Case Home. Within hours of buying it, he messaged Elaine. "Hi Elaine, hope you are keeping well." Elaine replied, "Who is this, please?" He responded, "Sorry, I may have the wrong number. Is this Elaine O'Hara?" Then he told her it was David. "This is an old friend. We used to play together, and I miss it terribly. Would love to catch up." Elaine's response was clear. "I'm not into blood anymore." But Dwyer didn't leave it there. He began to insert himself back into Elaine's life, gradually, deliberately. Over the following weeks and months, the messages became darker. Dwyer called himself her master. Elaine was referred to as his slave. In that dynamic, he set the rules. He gave the instructions. He told Elaine what to do, what to say, what to wear, what to bring, and what to hide. And while Elaine did engage with many of those exchanges, what came through in the messages was a relationship built around control. At times, the texts were about sex and submission. At other times, they moved into something much more violent. Dwyer wrote about knives, blood, stabbing, and killing. One message read, "Still dying to knife someone. Worried I might do it." In another, when Elaine referred to someone in the USA, he replied that it would cost thousands and that he could not wait that long to sink my knife into flesh and see blood pour. There were messages about marks being left on Elaine after his visits. When she raised concern about them, he told her not to worry, saying they could use pseudo-cream and arnica and that she could wear polo necks. There were also messages that suggested planning and a concern with avoiding detection. When Elaine mentioned another man, Dwyer replied, "He won't know about you, that is certain." Then he added, "The more male DNA and fingerprints in your flat, the better. Get his prints on your kitchen knife." For investigators, the messages were no longer just evidence of a relationship. They were evidence of an escalating pattern and a desire to harm. In late 2011, Dwyer bought 2 more pay-as-you-go Nokia phones. These were the phones Gardai would come to know as the master phone and the slave phone. Between December 1st, 2011 and August 22nd, 2012, the day Elaine died, there were 1,369 text messages and 11 calls between those 2 phones. The Garoon phone then went quiet. Now Gardai understood why. Dwyer had moved the relationship onto the 2 secret phones. The master and the slave phones were in almost exclusive contact with each other. Elaine's secret phone was the one she was seen holding on CCTV on the day she disappeared. The other phone was the Nokia recovered from the silt and mud of Vartree Reservoir. Dwyer thought those phones were hidden. He thought they were gone. But they were not. Nokia lived up to its informal billing as indestructible and as tough as they come. On October the 7th, 2013, Gardai carried out a final high-sensitivity search at Vartry Reservoir, using underwater metal detectors and divers. Each time the detector sounded, divers marked the spot and searched through the mud. That day, more evidence came up from the reservoir. Another bag, more BDSM gear, a pair of glasses, and then another Nokia phone. Gardai knew what it was. It was the fifth phone, the one used as the slave phone. Later that day, using an 8-digit code on the glasses, the retail manager of Specsavers in Dunleary was able to identify the owner. The glasses belonged to Elaine O'Hara. With both burner phones recovered, the digital investigation could go deeper. A huge amount of deleted messages were extracted from what computer crime analysts described as unallocated clusters. These were the fragments of data that remained buried on the devices, even after messages had been deleted. And what they recovered showed that the final weeks of Elaine's life were not random or unexplained. There was a pattern. It was part of a long and carefully constructed plan that would end with the murder of Elaine O'Hara. 8 days before her death, while Elaine was still in hospital, she received a message from Dwyer. "Am I right in thinking you don't want to die anymore?" The messages kept coming. Then, on August the 22nd, 2012, the day Elaine was killed, she and Dwyer contacted each other 64 times. That detail changed the meaning of something Frank O'Hara had remembered from that same day. When Elaine was in the car with him, visiting her mother's grave, Frank had asked her to stop texting and spend time with him. Now Gardai knew who she had been texting, the man who would kill her just hours later. At around 4:50 p.m, Elaine texted Dwyer to say she had not had time to eat. She asked whether she was allowed to wear socks and whether she could bring her inhaler. Dwyer replied, "Yes to socks, leave the inhaler. More painful getting stabbed on an empty stomach. Suit yourself." It was a small detail, but it showed something important. She was not making her own decisions. Dwyer was calling the shots. She was vulnerable, to a point where she was asking if she could eat or bring her inhaler, and he knew it. At that time, Elaine was still in her apartment. At 5:05 p.m, CCTV showed her leaving the car park of Bellarmine Plaza in her Fiat Punto. She appeared distressed. In her hand was the second phone, the slave phone, the one no one in her family knew she had. At around 5:22 p.m, she texted Dwyer to say she had arrived at the cemetery. He replied, "Okay, take only keys and slave phone. Make your way on foot to the park next door." Elaine pleaded with him to allow her to take her inhaler. Eventually, he agreed. His instructions continued. Cross railway bridge into next park near cliffs. Then, look for railway footbridge. Cross bridge and head for opposite end of park, near steps to sea. Elaine texted him to say she was at the steps. His final message came at 6 p.m. Go down to shore and wait. And that is where the messages stopped. From the outside, Elaine's disappearance had looked like a woman in crisis, leaving her apartment without her usual phone, her handbag, her medication, or her purse. But the evidence now showed something very different. Elaine had not simply wandered towards the coast. She had been directed there, step by step, by Graham Dwyer. He had spent months building a secret world around Elaine. He had controlled it. He had hidden it, and when she disappeared, he believed the evidence had disappeared with her. But a year later, an unseasonably dry summer lowered the water at Vartry Reservoir. A dog ran into undergrowth in the Dublin mountains and came back with evidence. The tip-off that gave a fragment of a name became the first step in unmasking a monster. Graham Dwyer was arrested and charged with the murder of Elaine O'Hara on October the 18th, 2013. He was 41 years old at the time of his arrest. Dwyer was born in Bandon, Cork in 1972. While not particularly sporty, he was popular in secondary school. He had an interest in music and was considered a talented artist. He played bass in a local band, Strangeways, with his mates. His ambition to become an architect emerged early. As a student in Bandon, he took technical drawing classes at the local vocational school, the Tech, because it was not available in his own school. He went on to study architecture at DIT Bolton Street, graduating with a degree in 1997. He became a member of the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland and built a successful career, eventually working as a senior architect with A&D Whitechart. He was married to Gemma Healy, whom he had met during his studies. The couple had 2 young children together, and Dwyer also had an adult son from a previous relationship. They lived in Foxrock, South Dublin. By all outward appearances, he was living a normal middle-class life. Outside of work, he had a number of interests, including the outdoors. He spent evenings building model planes and on weekends flying them. He was a member of local flying clubs and regularly competed. He had a strong interest in cars, owning several high-end models over the years, including a Porsche 911 he referred to as his baby. Those who knew him described him as quiet, capable and technically skilled, particularly with computers. But alongside that life, there were pressures. Following the financial crash, Dwyer experienced significant pay cuts, including a €10,000 cut in January 2013. And there were financial strains within the household, as well as the pay cut, with his wife Gemma losing her job. And while there was little outwardly to suggest anything unusual, evidence later showed that aspects of his behaviour, including a long-standing fascination with knives, had existed long before he met Elaine O'Hara. At the trial, the prosecution case was built on the very things he thought would never be found. The secret phones, the deleted messages, the reservoir evidence, the DNA, the movements, the final instructions. Elaine O'Hara's vulnerabilities had been placed before the public in a way her family had never wanted. But in court, those same details were also part of understanding how she had been targeted, isolated and controlled. This was not simply a case about alternative sexual behaviour. It was a case about coercion and domination, about a man who recognised vulnerability and exploited it. Work records presented to the court showed that Graham Dwyer had worked a full, ordinary 8-hour day on the day Elaine O'Hara was killed, and again the following day. On its face, it was the routine of a normal life continuing uninterrupted, sitting in stark contrast to the evidence that would follow. Among the most disturbing material uncovered during the investigation were a series of video files found on Dwyer's work computer. These were not abstract or fictional. They showed real encounters. In several of them, Dwyer was filmed engaging in sexual activity with women, including Elaine, while cutting them with knives. Alongside these were other recordings and digital files, including animations depicting throat cutting and extreme violence, as well as videos in which Dwyer inflicted harm on himself, including one in which he stabbed himself and another in which he experimented with chloroform. In total, 38 video files were recovered. 35 involved women, and 2 featured Dwyer himself. Taken together, they formed a body of material that the prosecution argued demonstrated a clear pattern of behaviour, one that extended beyond fantasy and into real-world action. Further documents found on his computer added to that picture. One described a trip to Newcastle, detailing a violent sexual assault at knife point in a hotel room, including references to strangulation and the use of chloroform. Another referenced an incident in St. Stephen's Green. Whether these counts reflected real events or sick fantasies was a matter for interpretation, but their content reinforced the prosecution's case around intent and escalation. There was also a folder titled EH, which contained a document authored by Elaine O'Hara, alongside other material connected to her. Another file, titled Killing Darcy, would later become central during the trial. In the early stages of the investigation, Gardai conducted a series of interviews with Dwyer over a 24-hour period. He was interviewed 5 times and chose not to sleep, remaining in custody while investigators returned repeatedly with further questions. Rather than confront him immediately with the full weight of their evidence, Gardai adopted a more measured approach. They asked about ordinary aspects of his life, his work, his finances, his family, even his involvement in model airplane flying. To Dwyer, it appeared conversational. In reality, each answer was being cross-checked against information already gathered. Over time, those seemingly routine background questions began to close in on him. Details he offered freely aligned with elements already known from the digital evidence. The link between him and the persona of Master was undeniable. He initially refused to speak about Elaine O'Hara. It was not until the 4th interview, when it had become clear how much information Gardai had assembled, that he acknowledged knowing her. He admitted that they had engaged in a sexual relationship, and later confirmed his involvement in BDSM, but tried to say the dynamic was driven by Elaine, claiming that she had initiated and encouraged the behaviour, including what he described as bloodletting. That position created further problems for him. Investigators already knew that there had been no direct communication between the two on their personal phones. All contact had taken place through prepaid burner phones. Dwyer denied knowledge of those phones, yet could not explain how he and Elaine had maintained contact over an extended period. He also accepted that he was the man captured on CCTV carrying a red school bag from Elaine's apartment, the same bag that would later be fished out of Vartry Reservoir containing knives and other items. In the course of those interviews, he provided Gardai with his sister's address. That detail would later take on added significance, as it was located close to the false address used when registering the prepaid Garoon phone linked to the texts with Elaine. The trial heard that over 14 months, Gardai conducted 619 separate lines of inquiry across Ireland, the United Kingdom and the United States. They compiled 511 reports, interviewed 488 individuals, and took 788 witness statements. More than 5,300 hours of CCTV footage were examined in detail, while a dedicated team of approximately 20 Gardai worked full-time on the case. Central to that effort was the recovery and analysis of digital evidence. More than 2,600 text messages were reconstructed, including material retrieved from devices that had been buried underwater and in mud for over a year. The use of mobile site analysis, device links, and message reconstruction became a key feature of the case, setting a precedent for how digital evidence could be used in complex prosecutions. Early in proceedings, Mr. Justice Hunt issued a warning to the jury about the nature of the material they would hear, describing it as potentially distressing. For the state, Sean Guerin SC led the prosecution, supported by Anne-Marie Lawler and Sinead McGrath. Their case focused on the relationship between Dwyer and Elaine, describing it as manipulative, coercive, and ultimately fatal. They argued that her vulnerabilities had been exploited, and that the evidence demonstrated a clear pattern of control. A significant moment in the trial came with the testimony of a woman named Darcy Day, who gave evidence via video link from the United States. Gardai had identified her through material found on Dwyer's computer. She told the court she was too afraid to be in the same room as him. Her evidence connected directly to documents recovered during the investigation, including the file titled Killing Darcy. In that document, Dwyer described in graphic terms the rape and murder of a woman, including references to stabbing and throat cutting. Darcy Day confirmed that she had used the name referenced in the document. She also gave evidence that Dwyer had spoken about Elaine O'Hara in their communications, stating that he had previously cut her, and that she had, at times, asked him to kill her. He described the fantasy of stabbing a woman during sex. In messages presented to the court, Dwyer wrote, "Having been responsible for creating 3 lives, wasn't I entitled to take just one?" The trial also heard that, shortly before proceedings began, Dwyer had sent a Christmas card to Darcy Day after obtaining her home address, in which he denied any involvement in murder and suggested he was being blamed for a suicide. Throughout the trial, members of Elaine's family were present as deeply personal aspects of her life were examined in detail. The reading of messages and the playing of video material proved particularly difficult, revealing elements of her private life that had never previously been known to them. One message, sent by Dwyer in May 2011, stood out. He wrote that he had been lucky with last victim, and that he needed the perfect plan. Elaine responded, "There's no such thing as a perfect plan." The defence challenged the prosecution case on multiple fronts, questioning the interpretation of the evidence, the conduct of the investigation, and the absence of a definitive cause of death. They argued that the relationship between Dwyer and Elaine had been consensual, and that the evidence did not exclude the possibility that she had taken her own life. The prosecution didn't argue. They knew that a definitive cause of death was never established. That absence did not prevent the case from proceeding. Instead, the prosecution relied on the totality of the evidence. The convergence of the circumstantial evidence was beyond explanation. The case rested on the weight of the evidence. A jury of 7 men and 5 women heard evidence from 197 witnesses and examined 327 exhibits. Among the witnesses to take to the stand was Gemma Dwyer. She spoke quietly at first, composed, answering questions about her life with her husband, Graham Dwyer, their home, their children, the routines of an ordinary family. She described a busy middle-class life, work, school runs, evenings at home. There was nothing in her account that suggested anything out of the ordinary. Then the focus shifted to a specific exhibit, an item recovered during the investigation. Gardai had found a spade near the body of Elaine O'Hara. Gemma Dwyer was shown it in court. She said she recognised it immediately. The stickers on it, the splatters of orange-red paint. They had been painting the fencing and the shed in their garden. The paint, she said, had gotten everywhere. She told the court the spade had been missing from their home for months. The spade was from their garden. She was sure of it. Each piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. When taken together, it was enough to satisfy the jury after deliberation, and they returned a unanimous verdict. Graham Dwyer was found guilty of the murder of Elaine O'Hara. Following the verdict, statements were issued by both families. Dwyer's wife Gemma expressed sympathy for the O'Hara family and asked for privacy, particularly in relation to the protection of her children. Dwyer himself issued a statement through his legal team, thanking his lawyers and supporters. He did not make any reference to Elaine O'Hara. At sentencing, Elaine's family delivered a victim impact statement that reflected the lasting impact of her death. They spoke of the loss of a daughter and a sister, of unanswered questions that would remain with them, and of the difficulty of hearing her private life examined in such a public forum. They asked questions that could never be fully answered. When did she realise it was no longer a game? Did she try to escape? Was she in pain? Was she alone? They described that uncertainty as their life sentence. Graham Dwyer was sentenced to life imprisonment. In delivering the sentence, the court found that he had deliberately preyed on Elaine's vulnerabilities in order to satisfy what were described as his own perverse and violent desires. The case would later raise wider legal questions, particularly around the use of phone data. Some of those laws would be challenged at a European level, but the conviction itself was not affected. To this day, the murder of Elaine O'Hara stands as one of the most complex and significant criminal investigations in Irish history, not only for its brutality, but for the way in which digital evidence was used to reconstruct the truth. Elaine O'Hara was more than the details that emerged after her death. She was a daughter, a sister, an aunt, a friend, a worker, a volunteer, and a woman trying to build a life for herself, trying her best, while managing difficulties most people around her could never fully see. For more than a year, her family had lived with uncertainty. They had searched parks and coastlines. They had placed flowers in the sea. They had tried to make sense of an absence that had no explanation. In the end, the explanation came from the evidence, from the smallest details. Her Dunn's Stores card, a toll record, a pair of glasses that led to her Specsavers branch, a phone number, a false name, a phone at the bottom of the reservoir, and one final instruction, sent at 6 p.m. on the evening Elaine O'Hara disappeared. Go down to shore and wait. And she did. Right to the very end, Graham Dwyer was in control. Until the evidence took that control away. Thank you for listening to this episode of Lines of Enquiry. If you're enjoying the podcast, leaving a rating or review really helps. We've now passed 4,000 5-star ratings on Spotify, along with a growing number of reviews on Apple Podcasts. Those reviews make a real difference and help new listeners find the series. Make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast to get notified whenever a new episode is released. We read every comment, and we're genuinely grateful for the time you take to share your thoughts. If you're listening on Spotify, you can also leave a comment on this episode. We'd love to hear from you. You can get in touch with us directly by emailing linesofinquiry@goloudnow.com if you have a question or a case you'd like us to cover. We'd love to hear from you. Follow us on Instagram at Lines of Enquiry Podcast, and if you can, share the podcast with others. Lines of Enquiry is presented by me, John Sweetman. The podcast is created by Darren Cleary. Our executive producer is Owen Brennan. Producers are Siobhan Walsh and Siobhan Maguire. This episode was written by Anna Priestland and edited by Darren Cleary. Sound design and editing by Neil Kavanagh, with legal, marketing and social media support from the team at GoLoud. Join me next time as we open another case and follow the evidence wherever it leads. Because, in the end, everything done in the dark comes to light.